Ah, early 2000s cartoons. What a time to be alive. I'm not going to disclose exactly the year I was born, but I lived through pretty much like three different eras of nostalgia. Or maybe two and a half, I don't know. And growing up, Cartoon Network was definitely one of my favorites. It had all the classics. And apparently, the classics are all coming back. But there is one show that is not getting revived. There is one show that I did not like when I was younger. There is one show that is far more devious and unsettling than anything else out of all the classic cartoons, and of course I am referring to Billy and Manfred. I like to think of this channel as a journal. I don't revisit old cartoons out of the sake of nostalgia or so I can review them. I do it primarily because I feel as though there are things from my childhood that are unexplained and I want closure for them. These videos are more of a way to document my thought process going through this. With shows like Codename Kids Next Door and Courage the Cowardly Dog, yeah, they had a lot of scary moments that stuck out in my memory, but I still really liked them when I was younger, and I never finished them, so I wanted to go back and really understand what they were really all about. Rewatching and better understanding these are as fun as they are insightful. Like, really, these cartoons have some genuinely good messages that still hold up. And if you want to hear more about those two, I have videos of them up on the channel. But The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is a show that I did not like when I was younger. Aside from, I don't know, Slender Man, this show was like my childhood sleep paralysis demon. There were primarily two episodes that really stuck in my memory, and you should probably know them by now because I mention the two of them like every third video, and that's the Christmas special and the Wishing Skull episode. Now, there was a crossover between Billy and Mandy and the KND, so whenever I did that video, I talked about the crossover and briefly touched on some of my opinions about the series, mainly because I wasn't really planning on doing a full review, because I feel like I already mentioned it all the time. But then I finished the series, and something fell off. I went and I did a bunch of research on it and I watched a bunch of other people's reviews on it and analyses of it too, and it felt like there was just one question that couldn't be answered. And eventually I realized what the problem was. But before I get into any of that, I want to talk about the show itself, starting with its development. Billy and Mandy were two characters created by Maxwell Adams and first appeared in the now lost short Billy and Mandy in the Trepanation. It's about drilling a hole into a human skull, okay? That's what it's about. I don't know how to pronounce the word, the official term, but that's what it's about. Now, some executive or whatever saw that and thought, you know what we should do? Let's show this to developing minds. Showing this to kids will not have any consequences at all, unless you count the creation of Bradworst YT. Now, I remember hearing somewhere that Grim was always intended to be the third character, but I also remember hearing from other sources that it was originally going to be the devil, but Cartoon Network didn't like that, even though they were allowed to show this, and this, and this. You know, come to think of it, when's the last time you've seen an angel in a cartoon before? And you're not allowed to show the devil, but you are allowed to show the Grim Reaper? Like, what the? How does that even? Oh my god, never mind. Before the kids next door had one big pick, Billy and Mandy one big pick. The big pick was this huge thing in which the children of the world were able to vote on what the next cartoon would be, and lo and behold, Billy and Mandy was the winner. The other winner that year was Whatever Happened to Robot Jones, which is a painfully fitting title because it was cancelled after literally 2 seasons. Kinda defeats the purpose of the big pick if you're just gonna cancel it anyway. And it's actually pretty sad though, because this show had a pretty comfy late 90s kind of art style to it. Almost reminds me of OG Arthur a bit, but I'm probably not gonna watch it still. But here's the thing. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy wasn't always called The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Originally, it went under the title Grim and Evil. The show consisted of two segments, one focusing on the titular trio of Grim, Billy, and Mandy, the other focusing on a different titular trio of Evil Con Carne. They are an organization of incompetent supervillains that repeatedly try and fail to take over the world. They're also a parody of the Brotherhood of Evil from Doom Patrol. Much like a tumor, Cartoon Network wanted to pretty much like cut out and then completely scrub Evil Concarny. It was weird because like first they separated Grim and Evil into two shows, that being Grim vs. Billy and Mandy, and then the other one simply called Evil Concarny. They gave each of them their own intro, and this for a time was actually fine. And then they canceled Evil Concarny before it was able to even finish its second season. They even like edited the older Grim and Evil episodes to like separate the segments and sort them out differently, and it's like, okay, on one hand, like, sure, I mean, I guess it does make things less confusing, but then it's also like, are you trying to gaslight people into thinking that this show never existed? I know what you're hiding, Cartoon Network. And that's really a shame because this show is a hidden gem. In a lot of ways, I kind of prefer it over Billy and Mandy. I feel like the humor is a lot better, it's a lot less repetitive and relies on gross out humor less. It's also just less mean spirited in general. The kind of G.I. Joe parody allows for a lot of really fun storylines, and the characters are all really likable and bounce off each other really well. And then after Evil Concarny was cancelled, they moved General Scar, a supporting character of that series, to the main Billy and Mandy show. And even though I do like their respect for continuity, I feel like they really kind of screwed up his whole character because his rivalry with Hector is what made him fun and interesting. And you know how I'll never shut the fuck up about how that Christmas special was really scary? Well, it turns out Evil Concarny also had its own Christmas special that was also really scary and also about Santa turning evil. But thankfully, Santa Claus was rescued by, oh, God have mercy. Okay, and that feels like a sign. Now let's move on from Evil Concarny and actually talk about the main subject of this video, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. What is it, like 7 minutes in? That's gotta be a new record. Last time it was 10. In all seriousness, though, I do kind of miss the old variety show format. If Evil Concarny was like the more light-hearted comedy, and Billy and Mandy was like the kind of more horror-focused, more cynical one, it would have been a really nice balance for the series. I remembered this show as a horror show with funny moments sprinkled throughout, but upon rewatching it, turns out it's actually a comedy show with scary moments sprinkled throughout. It's kind of weird because I went into it hoping, wanting it to be as scary or scarier than I remembered, but in actuality it turned out to be really funny, which is still fine. I know this is a bit of a hot take, but in my Courage video I said that Courage wasn't really as scary as most people hype it up. It's more the fun kind of scary like Scooby-Doo. And Billy and Mandy, on the other hand, I think actually is a lot scarier. The difference is that it just tries to be scary less. Now, this does not mean that Billy and Mandy is definitively better than Courage. I actually think Courage is a lot better. The style's a lot more cozy, it's much more consistent, and also a lot less repetitive. I know, somehow it's more consistent and less repetitive. And speaking of repetitive, I think Billy and Mandy kind of has 3 settings, and each setting is kind of similar to one of the 3 main characters. The Mandy setting, as I like to call it, is whenever the show has a much more serious tone and it becomes genuinely really scary and disturbing. The Grim setting, which is probably my favorite setting, is when the show has a much more kind of sassy, satirical tone of comedy. One really good example of this is the episode My Fair Mandy. That one felt very self-aware. Definitely one of my favorites. And finally, we have the Billy setting. The Billy setting. So, with this one, it's a lot of like immature, gross out humor. So your average, your poo, your butt, your mucus, your snot, the boogers, and all that kind of stuff. And this isn't bad. It's not terrible. The thing is, they just default to it way more than they should. And really, that's my biggest issue with this series, is the over-reliance on gross-out, immature humor. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some classic, hilarious episodes, and as a casual viewing every now and then, it can be really fun. But when you're trying to, like, stay up all night for 8 hours and binge as much of the show as you can for research purposes and analyze the lore, it can be so defeating. Sometimes there'd be a really well constructed joke, followed by a really lazy joke, followed by a mention of actual straight up fucking menopause. What the fuck? I thought this was a kid's show. Again, you can't show the devil, but you can show this shit? Billy's dad, Harold, has his own style of humor where he's basically just an asshole. I actually think he's funnier than Billy. I think he's the funniest character in the entire show. Now, I know it sounds like I'm being really negative, but there was a reason I never stopped watching it, because something kept drawing me in. Something was calling me, and that is, plain and simple, the three main characters. I find the relationship of Richard Horvitz, Grey Griffin, and Greg Eagles very fascinating. The fact that their friendship isn't a friendship, it's fundamentally unstable. Grim, a prisoner that can never be freed. Billy, an idiot that can never learn. Mandy, a villain that will never get her comeuppance. Some may compare Billy to SpongeBob, as SpongeBob is very dumb but still well meaning, except I argue that that doesn't really fit Billy's character. Yes, he is the opposite of Mandy, but not in the sense that Billy is good and Mandy is evil, more so in the sense that Mandy is knowledge and Billy is idiocy. Now, this next part isn't my theory, this is like someone else's analysis, so I'm going to credit them here. The YouTube channel Buried Entertainment did a whole analysis video on Billy and Mandy, and their theory was that Mandy represents reality. And I really like this interpretation because if you think about it, Mandy is mean, cruel, honest, and ultimately always gets her way in the end. That's why she always wins, because she represents reality itself. And that means that, likewise, Billy represents delusion, an unlivable, impossibly happy fantasy. It's a really great video, and I recommend you check it out, but I want to add on to it. You see, a lot of people try to theorize, even myself have tried predicting, why exactly is Mandy the way that she is? Is she some sort of demon who kidnapped her parents? Is she created by those scientists that invented Grimm's Scythe? Well, I believe I've finally, once and for all, solved it. The true answer behind Mandy is that there is none. And I don't mean that in some, like, eldritch horror, oh, it's scarier if you don't know kind of way. I mean that in the sense that the universe of Grim and Evil is a backwards place. It's a reverse story. Morals are learned only to then be unlearned. If the Grim Reaper, the living embodiment of death itself, is portrayed as a pathetic, self-deprecating fool, then it's only logical that a little girl, the image of innocence and wholesomeness, would be the evilest of all evils. Parallel thought can be seen in the horror classic Night of the Living Dead. One of the first zombies to be shown was a young girl, and this is to show that nothing is safe from the corruption. Things have gone past the point of no return. Mandy is that girl. But there's actually a chance that this theory isn't true. Series creator Maxwell Adams, whom has autism, would later state that the three characters are all meant to also have autism and be different sides of his personality. Billy is just supposed to represent him in La La Land, so maybe he isn't delusion, he's just bliss? But I don't know, now that I think about it, maybe that does actually support the delusion theory even more. Now, I'm not really an expert on the spectrum, but I do happen to be an expert on the spectrum. Now, saying that Billy has Asperger's is kind of offensive, because, look, throughout the series, they constantly reiterate how dumb Billy is. They even at one point stated that he was so dumb an alien refused to eat his brain. And so to just say that, like, nah, that's all just, Asperger's, is kind of like, what? Mandy, on the other hand, isn't really all that great either, since as we all know, she's a cold, unfeeling monster. And it's kind of a stereotype that people who have autism are these purely logical, big brains who have no regard for other people's emotions. In my house, there's a big table and a bar, and I always, when I'm eating, prefer to sit at the bar. I think the lighting is a lot better, and the elevation of the table is the perfect angle to me to where I can eat and just kind of sit there and relax. But my family always insists that I go in the big table. I always hate sitting on the big table because I feel like I have to crouch over to actually reach my food, and the light above is like a color that really bothers me, and like it's not that I wanted to be excluded from the family or the conversation or anything. It's just that I think the bar is a better place to sit. And so I find it very hard to express that because it's kind of hard to say anything without it sounding mean. And there are a lot of other examples of times where I've wanted to be direct and honest, but have been somewhat discouraged from it because it's seen as rude or mean, and even though I'm not really trying to do that. Mandy is someone who is direct and honest, but is intended to be taken as mean. She is someone who would sit at the bar to get away from her family. Grimm is a bit of an interesting case. His whole character is that he does have the potential to be powerful and scary, but he's never really able to show it because of his contract with Billy and Mandy. And when things are taken out of his control, he can sometimes get really upset and break down. And the thing is, things are never in his control. He's cruel, but not quite as cruel as Mandy, and he is sometimes kind of dumb and childish, but not as dumb and childish as Billy. But I think his primary character trait is annoyed and depressed. Now, I don't think I see any autism stereotypes in his personality. This is either the type of situation where it's like he is a well written character who happens to be autistic and it's just not his primary character trait, or this is the type of situation where he wasn't really written with that intention, but then years later was retconned to be that, kind of like the whole Dumbledore being gay thing. And I said this before, Maxwell Adams is autistic, and if he thought these three were okay, then that's his choice to make. I personally do like these three as characters, but I feel like excusing all their weird behaviors with just, oh, it's autism, feels a bit weird. And I just want to mention that Grimm is coded to be Jamaican, but in the episode where he turns human, he's a white guy. So either he was Jamaican and then became white, or all along he was just a white guy pretending to be Jamaican. I honestly don't know which is worse. Of course, there's also the Christmas special, which I talk about way more than is healthy. Rewatching it, it was still pretty scary, but it's also a lot more funny than I remember. Like, Gilbert Godfrey is in it, and there's even like a Clockwork Orange joke. The thing is, vampires used to really get me when I was younger, so the thought of Santa turning into this, monstrous creature of the night was really unsettling. But really, the episode is kind of the perfect balance for a Billy and Mandy episode since it's equally as scary as it is funny. But really, the biggest issue with this episode is the plot hole. Santa got Billy, of all people, to make the vampire cure? What, was Rupert too busy to do it? Was Elfa Strike on holiday? No pun intended. During and after the run of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, there were three movies produced, those being Billy and Mandy's Big Booty Adventure, Wrath of the Spider Queen, and Underfist Halloween Bash. Wrath of the Spider Queen we can skip because it's not all that important. We get a grim origin story in this episode, and I also really like how it's a Jeff-centered story. Jeff is a giant spider that imprinted on Billy, except Billy actually hates spiders. He's one of the few characters that's just like actually a nice person who wants to be friendly, but at the same time he's also constantly being punished, so this is what I mean when I say the show feels kind of mean-spirited at times. I know this will make the video kind of disjointed because I'm not really doing these in order, but I want to talk about Underfist next. The concept of Underfist was originally pitched as a joke that basically they would pair all the silliest characters like Jeff and Fred Fredberger with all the most serious like Hoss Delgado and General Scar to form their own kind of Fantastic Four Ghostbusters group. They star in a 2008 TV movie also called Underfist, and it was originally meant to be the premiere of a full Underfist movie series, not TV show, full-on movie series, but it didn't really take off, and instead it ended up being the finale of Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. I actually kind of prefer this because I feel like doing more Underfist episodes would have kind of ruined what made the original so special. Irwin is actually the main focus this time around, and surprisingly, I actually really like him as a main protagonist. Throughout Billy and Mandy, we learn more and more about Irwin's surprisingly rich family lineage. Apparently, his mother was a mummy, and his grandpa on his dad's side was the Dracula. This makes Irwin a mummy-dampier hybrid. His arc is that he's scared his monster half will take over and turn him evil, but in the end he learns to accept his monster side while using his powers for good. They gave him that one, mummy bandage power that, a bunch of Ben 10 and Generator X characters have for whatever reason. Stories where the hero has to fight themselves because they think they're turning into a monster or because they're actually turning into a monster is one of my favorite things ever. It's not really all that deep because, it's Billy and Mandy, but I'm glad that they went with it anyway. Teaming up with Hoss Delgado also makes sense because they teamed up in the original series, and Hoss's deep disdain towards monsters does create some good friction between them. Overall, Under Fist is a great movie, probably one of my favorites in fact, but I feel like the place where it falls flat is actually with the original main characters. Mandy becomes the President of the United States of America, while Billy and Grim become scientists working for the government who build all of Under Fist's gadgets. And I will admit, okay, Grim does have the drip. He does look like the main protagonist of an edgy anime series. I really don't like this direction for their characters. It really has nothing to do with them, and it just feels completely random. So moving on to, the actual movie, Billy and Mandy's Big Boogie Adventure, Cartoon Network movies will always be the peak of human cinema. Though, to be completely honest, I think Big Boogie Adventure is just okay. Though I think this movie probably has one of the single greatest movie openings I've ever seen in my entire life. So it begins with the future, and it's all post-apocalyptic, and this unknown bad guy has taken over the entire world, and then it's revealed that this is actually only 2 weeks into the future. This is such a funny twist on the whole bad guy wins future, and it's especially a thing meant to make fun of a lot of cartoons at the time which were doing that trope. Then there's this really catchy stylized opening song that I absolutely love. I hate how most movies just have words flying across the screen with boring calm music. Show me some dancing jazzy skeletons. Have some fucking fun with it. The rest of the movie isn't really bad, it just doesn't feel as upbeat or creative as the opening scene. Basically what it's about is Grim, Billy, Mandy, and Irwin need to voyage across the river Styx and get to Horror's Hand before the Boogeyman does, in order for Grim to reclaim his title as the Grim Reaper. I know that the whole time travel plotline is mainly just a joke subplot and it's not really meant to be taken seriously, but actually it creates a huge plot hole in the movie, but I don't even want to get into it because it's just pointless. This movie actually does quite a good job dissecting the characters' personalities. Grim hates Billy and Mandy, but because his personality is partially cruel and partially silly, he can occasionally get along with them one at a time. Despite claiming to not like Billy, Mandy has still rescued him countless times and is in this movie even implied to actually care about him. And then we have Horror's Hand, the most powerful artifact in all the underworld. It's said that in order to control it, you yourself have to not have any fear. And of course, Mandy being Mandy, believing herself to be completely fearless, goes to take the Infinity Gauntlet, Reality Gauntlet, Horror's Hand, and for the first time, well not for the first time, but for one of the few times in the series, she gets humbled. And so of course, Mandy being the most powerful, incalculable, unstoppable evil, what possible horrors beyond human imagine could she ever possibly be afraid of? She sees the future, and there she's like an obedient wife, basically. Her worst fear is conforming to a societal standard, to becoming quote-unquote normal, and this is surprisingly a lot more profound than what I was expecting. Mandy is a deviant. She's cruel, yes, but she's the one smart person in this world populated by a bunch of dumbasses, and so by taking that away, her personality, her individuality, is destroyed. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that marriage is always a bad thing. What's bad is when things are pushed onto people when they don't want them. Then Grim steps forward to take a hold of Horror's hand, and it has no effect on him because he's already living the worst hell possible every day of his life. Living with Billy and Mandy. Grim gets his scythe back, the boogeyman fucking dies, and everything is wrapped up in a neat little bow. Of these three movies, there was originally intended for a fourth one to be created, that being the actual finale of the series, Billy and Mandy Destroy Us All! These three are so fascinating to watch. The fact that they all actually hate each other but are still forced to spend time anyway. One of the questions I always think when watching them is, how will their relationship end? Will they actually grow to be friends with each other or not? Will Billy one day learn his lesson and not be as stupid? Will Mandy ever successfully conquer the world? Will Grimm just kill the other two and, finally be free of the curse? Or will the three of them just be cursed to torment each other forever and ever and ever? For all eternity, every single day, the same old nonsense, like a stupid cartoon. The fact is, I don't really know. Apparently, Billy and Mandy Destroy Us All has the answer. From what I've heard, it wraps up all the loose ends, answered every unanswered question, and shows the characters growing up and finally shows us how their relationship will end. What is the final note this very cynical, mean-spirited show will end on? But we don't know. We may never know, because Cartoon Network refuses to let us be happy. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is not for everyone, especially when you look at the style of humor. But it's left us with some good food for thought and plenty of scarred childhoods. But really, the most important lesson I've learned is that the real Grim Adventures was the friends we made along the— Oh, Limbo! Like Limbo, I get it now! But anyways, this has been Bradwurst, signing off. I like ducks, especially when they're in banana peels and they talk about movies. Yes,